I've always loved music ever since. My mom was a singer. My dad thought he was a singer. And we had lots of music around the house. I was really lucky in that regard. And I started beating on things probably when I was 3 years old, pots and pans, oatmeal boxes, whatever. I think what put me over the edge is when I was about 7 years old. I was walking around my neighborhood. I lived in Anchorage, Alaska at the time. And this was in the winter, it was cold. So I walked past this gymnasium and there was a band in there rehearsing and there was a door cracked open. So me and my friends looked in the door, fascinated to see a band. And it was a kid playing drums. He was probably about 10, 12 years old. And at that moment, it was like, that's what I want to do. My approach to music has just evolved over the years. I mean, just from day one, it was just really like the joy of playing music. And I think it was always, my sister was a dancer and I used to love to dance. So it was always the beat. It was always the beat, that got me. My first love was probably jazz at the beginning. I heard Miles Smiles, Tony Williams on Miles Smiles, and I was like, whoa, man, that's, I want to do that. As I started to think I was okay, pretty good, I thought about music as a career, and people were advising me to go and study music at school. All the drummers that I saw playing that had gone to school sounded like Steve Gadd or somebody in that vein. All of them sounded like that. And I thought, I don't want to sound like everybody else. Well, a friend of mine who was a visual artist, who was kind of a mentor of mine in that, he was a big music fan, and he turned me on to Burning Spear and Osibisa and War and all these kind of alternative soul R&B music with a message kind of things. And it just kind of turned my head, because the Tiananmen Square incident had happened. I just gave away my age. But the Tiananmen Square incident had happened, and I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want it to be about something. Once that happened, I drove around listening to Peter Tosh's Mystic Man nonstop on my cassette player, like for weeks. I thought, I want to know more about this philosophy and this music and this culture. So at age 20, I saved up a little bit of money and filled up my backpack with rice and beans and socks and crayons and lighters and rolling papers and went to Jamaica. And I went on a 3-week visa the first time and stayed for about 2.5 months. I did that for 3 years in a row. Went on a 3-week visa and stayed. Oh, shit. Anyway, that's a long time ago. That ended up with me like living up in the hills with Rastafarians and carrying water through the hills and, sleeping out under the stars and, no electricity and that whole kind of thing. And understanding, I guess, the Rastafarian way of life is the best way that I could put it. Getting some insight into that. On my last trip to Jamaica, I had the good fortune of hooking up with Richie Daly from Third World, who introduced me to quite a few people and got to watch Third World rehearse for probably one of their biggest tours. But my buddy that I was with at the time thought, well, let's go back home and start our own band. I wanted to make music and talk about the conditions in my life and the conditions in my community. And that's what we went home and did. And so I made a couple of records with that band, and 10.5 years of playing with that band. Life happened, and fortunately found myself in Canada. When I became a working musician in Toronto, I found myself, in that sense of competition. Toronto is a very competitive city in the music world. So it was like when somebody got a gig that you knew, it was like, well, how did he get that gig? What's he doing? And I found that it just felt to me like everybody was trying to do what the most popular guy was doing, including myself. And, it served me well. I learned a lot that way, but ultimately just always wanted to have my own voice and speak for myself. And, music is the way I speak, I think, the most authentically. But just found myself trying to find ways to make myself unique. So, that had to do with my approach to playing the drums and my approach to rhythm and how I heard music. I started to notice that, if I did certain things, certain other, like bass player and the singer, which was that's my compass point, right? That's my barometer of like, am I doing a good job? If the bass player is bouncing his head and the singer turns around and smiles at me, I'm doing something right, So I just started noticing that, and I was like, okay, what did I do? So I would do more of that. And what that entailed was, well, they like to hear themselves. You know what I mean? Like the bass player wants to hear what his tone, and the singer wants to, she wants to hear her intonations and inflections and things, right? So my job is to support that. And then also the dancers as well. Those were kind of like the three elements, and just through that and through the years and years of, watching people dance, I realized the power in rhythm that you have in rhythm. Not to get too deep, but as a drummer, you've got all these other things that you could do to articulate, accentuate, and make the quarter notes do what you want them to do. You got your hi-hat, your snare, you got your dynamics, and all these different things that you can do to manipulate the quarter note or manipulate the feel. And in this room right here, I've done it with you and other people, and just okay, well, if I do this, and then just watch and see what happens, and see how that affects the band, how it affects the dancers. That's a lot of my thinking and my philosophy when it comes to how I play and approach building a groove.